he never meant for us to cross the line. It was just a night, just a moment, just a favor, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, his eyes held something heavier. Something that lingered. I remember standing there, shivering slightly, not just from the cold, but from the tension that filled the space between us. The light flickered softly above, throwing quiet shadows against the bathroom tiles. I told him I was fine, that I could wait until the heater kicked in again, but he insisted. His voice wasn't loud or demanding. It was gentle, steady, and almost warm enough to melt the anxiety building inside my chest. "Come on," he said. "You'll catch a cold." And just like that, I stepped into something more than just warmth. The bathroom was small but clean, the kind of place you wouldn't expect to hold any secrets. Steam curled from the corners of the hot shower he ran for me, the glass door misting over like it was trying to blur out what was about to unfold. He handed me a towel, not saying much, just standing there for a beat too long. I avoided his gaze, though I could feel it on me, like a question waiting to be asked. I didn't have any spare clothes with me. The rain had soaked everything. He offered me one of his shirts, and I took it without a word, fingers brushing against his briefly, soft, electric. That small contact pulled at something inside me. Not new exactly, but something I'd pushed away, buried deep under layers of denial and silence. That I stepped into the hot water slowly, letting it run over me, warming my skin, easing the tension in my shoulders. But my mind wasn't quiet. It echoed with thoughts I wasn't ready to face. How long had I been watching him like this? Not just as a friend. Not just as a guy who helped me out of the rain. But as something else. Something more. I thought maybe he noticed, maybe he had known all along, but never said anything. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe I was just reading into everything, desperate for a connection I couldn't even name. When I stepped out, wrapped in the towel and his oversized shirt, he was still there, sitting on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone but clearly not paying attention to it. The air between us felt thicker than the steam that followed me out. I sat down next to him, not too close but not too far either. My heart beat faster than it should have. He looked over at me and smiled, the kind of smile that was all lips and no teeth, a little unsure, a little nervous. And then he spoke, softly, as if afraid the words might break the air. "You okay now?" I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything without giving too much away. Silence stretched out, comfortable and strange at the same time. He looked back at his phone, and I thought that was it. That whatever tension had been between us would just fade into the night like steam off a mirror. But then his hand brushed against mine again. Not by accident. Not this time. My fingers twitched, but I didn't pull away. Neither did he. A breath caught in my throat, and he turned to face me fully. No jokes. No excuses. Just him, just me, and the space between us thinning with every heartbeat. His eyes searched mine, as if asking for permission, for understanding, for something he wasn't sure he had the right to want. I could hear the hum of the old heater kicking back to life in the corner of the room. A distant sound, but it grounded me somehow. I looked at him, really looked, and realized that I wanted him to close the space. That I was tired of pretending. Tired of acting like these feelings didn't exist. Tired of denying what my heart already knew. Still, I couldn't move. Not yet. There was fear, tangled up in my ribs. Not of him, but of what this meant, of how it would change everything. My mind raced with questions. Would he still look at me the same way in the morning? Would I? He shifted, leaning just slightly toward me, and I didn't move away. His breath brushed against my cheek, and I closed my eyes. Just for a second. Just to feel. I expected the kiss, but it didn't come, not yet. Instead, he whispered, You don't have to be afraid. Not here. And something inside me cracked open. Not broken, but released. I let my hand turn under his, fingers lacing slowly. He didn't flinch. He just held on. That night didn't erupt into passion. It simmered. It built quietly, through glances and skin brushing skin, through soft laughter and shaky breath. We lay side by side for what felt like hours, not talking much, just being close. The shirt he gave me smelled like him, clean, warm, and faintly citrus. I kept breathing it in, like it could steady the chaos in my chest. I wondered if he could feel it too, the shift, the change, the possibility of something neither of us dared name out loud. And when he finally reached for me, slow, deliberate, it wasn't lust I felt first. It was comfort. It was trust. It was something terrifying and beautiful all at once. His hand on my cheek, his thumb brushing the corner of my mouth. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. Just the promise of one. Just a pause before everything changed. I didn't resist. I didn't want to. Everything after that moved gently, like the world had softened around us. Every small touch was a confession, a story, a door opening. We didn't speak, but our bodies did. And when my head rested on his shoulder and his arms wrapped around me, I knew, whatever came next, I couldn't go back. Not to pretending. Not to silence. Not to hiding. This wasn't just about desire. It was about finally feeling seen. And nothing about it felt wrong. The night moved slowly, like time was bending to give us space, a soft pause from the noise of the world outside. His room was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of wood as the old house settled. I lay there, close enough to hear his breathing, but not touching him. Not yet. The space between us was small but filled with so much weight. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask for words, but somehow felt louder than any conversation we could have had. I kept staring at the ceiling, but I wasn't really seeing it. My mind was spinning, racing through every second that had led to this moment, every glance, every accidental brush of skin that suddenly didn't feel accidental anymore. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. The shirt he had given me clung slightly to my damp skin, warm from the shower but still sticking in places, like it didn't want me to forget how vulnerable I was. How bare I felt, even fully dressed. He shifted slightly beside me, just enough that the mattress dipped and I felt the movement in my bones. My heart jumped, stupid and fast, and I knew he could probably hear it. I didn't want to look at him. Not yet, not until I knew what was in his eyes. If I looked too soon, I was afraid I'd see something I didn't want to. Or worse, nothing at all. He didn't speak either. I wondered if he was going through the same storm inside, if his silence was made of the same questions as mine. Was this real? Did this mean something? Would we talk about it tomorrow, or pretend it never happened? I hated the not knowing. It made every second feel like walking a tightrope. And yet I didn't want to break the silence either. It felt sacred somehow, like if I spoke, I might shatter it, and everything we'd shared so far would scatter with it. My hand was resting between us on the bed, fingers curled loosely. I felt him shift again, and then his hand moved closer. Just a little. A test. My skin tingled where the air changed between us, like his presence alone could heat the space. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was thumping so hard I was sure the bed was shaking. Then his fingers touched mine. Lightly. Barely there. But it was enough. That small contact unraveled something inside me. I turned my head slowly, finally meeting his eyes. They were soft, nervous, but open. Not guarded like I feared. And in them, I saw the same fear I carried, The same hesitation, the same desire to hold on to this fragile thing between us. He didn't say anything, just let his fingers brush mine again, this time more intentional. I turned my palm toward him, letting our hands find each other in the middle. The way our fingers locked was quiet, unassuming, but my whole body reacted like I jumped into cold water. He gave my hand a small squeeze, and I squeezed back. It felt like an agreement. Like a promise. Like I see you. I'm scared too. But I'm here. I didn't mean to make it weird, he finally said, voice rough and low, almost a whisper. I turned to face him fully, still not letting go of his hand. You didn't, I said, and it came out too fast. I cleared my throat, softer this time. You didn't make it weird. His shoulders relaxed a little, the tension in his body easing just enough to notice. He let out a breath, and I realized he'd been holding it too. I don't know. I don't want you to think I crossed a line or something. I looked at him, really looked, and the worry on his face made my chest ache. He cared what I thought. He cared about not hurting me. That meant more than I could explain. You didn't, I said again, slower. I wanted it too. His eyes flicked up to meet mine, searching, and I didn't look away this time. I don't know what this is, I continued, barely hearing my own voice. But I don't want to pretend it's nothing. A silence stretched between us again, but it was different now. Not heavy. Just full. He leaned closer, just a bit, and I didn't move away. His hand was still in mine, warm and steady. When his forehead rested lightly against mine, it felt like everything inside me quieted. Like for once, I didn't have to be afraid of what I was feeling. We stayed like that, forehead to forehead, breathing each other in. It wasn't about the kiss anymore. It wasn't about the heat or the hunger. It was about being seen, being wanted, being held in a way I never knew I needed. My eyes fluttered closed, and in that darkness, I felt safe. Not just because of him, but because I was finally letting myself feel something real. Something I had pushed away for too long. When he did kiss me, it was slow and uncertain. Like he was afraid I might pull away. But I didn't. I kissed him back, just as softly, just as unsure. But in that uncertainty was truth. Honesty. And when we pulled apart, I didn't want to look away. I didn't want the moment to end. He smiled, small and a little crooked, and it made my stomach twist in the best way. You're cold, he murmured, and pulled the blanket up over us both. I settled beside him, his arm around my shoulder now, our bodies warm under the covers. I laid my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and for the first time in a long time, mine began to slow. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. I didn't know what any of this meant. But tonight, lying here in the quiet with him, it didn't matter. He was here. I was here. And for now, that was enough. The morning light crept into the room slowly, like it was trying not to wake us too soon. It filtered through the blinds in thin streaks, casting pale golden lines across the floor and the edge of the bed. I didn't want to open my eyes. I could feel the weight of his arms still resting lightly around me, his body warm behind mine, his breath soft and even against the back of my neck. For a moment I let myself stay in that in-between space, not quite asleep, not quite awake, just floating in the comfort of his closeness. It was the kind of feeling that made you forget the rest of the world existed, like the moment itself could stretch forever if you just didn't move. But of course, the world never stopped for long. And neither did the thoughts in my head. I opened my eyes slowly, careful not to shift too much. My body was relaxed, but my mind was beginning to stir with questions I hadn't let myself ask the night before. What were we now? Was this a mistake? Did he regret it? Was it just a moment of comfort, or had it meant something more to him the way it did to me? My stomach twisted at the thought. I didn't want to lose what we had, whatever it was. But I also didn't want to pretend it didn't happen. I hated the idea of going back to silence, of pretending that his lips hadn't touched mine so softly, that his arms hadn't held me like I was something worth keeping close. I turned slightly, slow enough not to wake him. His face was peaceful, the lines of worry that had danced across it last night now gone. I studied him quietly, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the slight flutter of his eyelashes, the rise and fall of his chest. It felt too intimate, like a moment I wasn't supposed to witness, but I couldn't look away. When he finally stirred, it was with a quiet sigh, his eyes opening slowly, blinking against the light. For a second, he looked confused, like he didn't know where he was. But then his eyes found mine, and something shifted. His gaze softened, and the corner of his mouth tugged up into a small smile that made my heart beat faster. "Hey," he whispered, voice low and still rough with sleep. "Hey," I whispered back, feeling awkward and exposed all over again. He looked at me for a moment longer before letting his eyes drift closed again, his arm pulling me in slightly closer, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. Or maybe we were both pretending we weren't terrified of what came next. We lay there in silence for a while, just listening to the world outside start to wake up. The hum of a car driving by, the distant bark of a dog, the soft chirping of birds somewhere nearby. It was peaceful, and yet the quiet between us was full of questions. Eventually, I pulled away slightly, just enough to sit up and rub the sleep from my eyes. He sat up too, running a hand through his hair and glancing at me sideways. There was something unreadable in his expression now. Not cold. Not distant. But guarded. "So," he said finally, his voice hesitant. "Last night, I felt my heart thud. This was it. The moment everything would either be real or unravel." I nodded slowly, searching his face for clues. "Yeah," I replied, not sure how else to start. "Are you okay?" he asked, and his voice cracked a little, like the question cost him something. I met his eyes. "I am. Are you?" He looked down at his hands, quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah. I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't think." He stopped, shaking his head, clearly frustrated with himself. "I didn't think I'd feel this way about someone. About you." My breath caught. The words weren't perfect, but they were honest. And they were enough. "You don't have to explain," I said, my voice softer now. "I didn't expect it either. But it happened. And I don't want to pretend it didn't." His eyes flicked back to mine, full of something deep and raw. "Me either." We sat there in that shared truth, the air between us easier to breathe now. There was no script for this. No clear direction. Just feelings and fear and the hope that maybe we could figure it out together. He got up first, pulling on a hoodie and offering me one of his older sweatpants to wear since my clothes were still damp from the night before. We moved around each other in the small room, brushing hands, stealing glances, every moment stitched with unspoken questions and quiet longing. When we sat at the small kitchen table eating leftover toast and cereal, it felt almost normal. Like we'd done this 100 times. But underneath it all was the current of something new, something fragile, and I could feel both of us trying to protect it. He looked up from his bowl, chewing slowly, then asked, "Do you think this changes things? Between us?" I looked at him, trying to find the right words. "I think it already has. But maybe that's not a bad thing." He didn't smile this time, but his eyes softened. "I don't want to mess this up," he said, and I could hear the fear behind the words. "You won't," I said, even though part of me was scared too. "We just have to be honest. Even if it's messy." He nodded, and I could see the weight on his shoulders lighten just a bit. That day passed slowly. We didn't talk about what to call it. We didn't try to define anything. But every look, every touch, every shared smile said more than words could. There was comfort in not rushing, in just being near each other. But even as we laughed over something stupid on TV or argued about how much sugar to put in tea, I could feel something building beneath the surface. A tension not born from discomfort, but from the gravity of what we were becoming. Something was shifting, and I didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. The sky had turned gray by the afternoon, the kind of overcast that made everything feel slower, quieter, like the whole world was holding its breath. We stayed inside, mostly in his room, not because we had to but because the outside felt too loud, too exposed. In here, we had our own world, one where we didn't have to explain ourselves to anyone else. But even in this quiet, I could feel the questions start creeping back into the corners of my mind. The stillness had a way of stirring up everything you tried to push down. I watched him as he sat across from me, flipping through a worn notebook on his desk, pretending to be focused on the old notes he hadn't touched in weeks. He was doing what I was, hiding in distraction. And that was what scared me. Because for all the warmth we'd shared the night before, for all the little glances and soft smiles this morning, something was shifting. Something invisible, but heavy. It was in the way he barely touched me now, how he didn't reach for my hand like he did when we were under the covers. I told myself not to read into it. But it was there. I tried to be present, to act like things were okay. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my hand, not even looking at the screen. I kept glancing up at him, hoping he'd say something, hoping he'd look at me and smile the way he did before. But he didn't. Not in that way. Not in the way that made my chest ache with that quiet, aching kind of joy. I finally broke the silence with something light, something dumb, asked if he wanted to order food, made a joke about us starving because neither of us knew how to cook more than noodles. He laughed, but it was short. Not fake, just distracted. I nodded slowly, trying not to show that it stung. He didn't mean to pull away. I knew that. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. I got up and walked toward the window, watching the rain start to tap against the glass. It was soft at first, then heavier. I hugged myself, not from cold, but from the sudden hollowness creeping into my chest. I didn't want to ask the question sitting on my tongue. I didn't want to ruin whatever we had left of the warmth. But it was building inside me, burning slowly, until I turned around and said it without meaning to. "Are you regretting it?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but it filled the room like thunder. He froze. The notebook in his hand stilled. He didn't answer right away. I watched his jaw tighten, his eyes staying fixed on the paper in front of him, though I could tell he wasn't seeing anything on the page. The silence between us grew louder by the second. "No," he said finally, but the word didn't carry the weight I needed. He looked up at me then, his expression complicated. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Just scared. "I don't regret it," he continued, voice more certain now. "But I don't know what to do with it either." I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. My throat felt tight. He stood up and walked toward me, slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. And maybe he was. Maybe we both were. He reached for my hands, held them gently, like they were glass. "I've never done this before," he said. "I don't know what it means to feel this way. I don't even know how to talk about it without feeling like I'm going to mess it up." His honesty hit me harder than anything else could. It wasn't rejection. It was fear. The same kind of fear I'd been carrying around for years, hidden under layers of silence and practiced smiles. I squeezed his hands, looked up into his eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone in this. "I'm scared too," I whispered. "Every second. I keep thinking this will disappear if I breathe too hard." He let out a breath, shaky and soft, and pulled me into a hug. We stood there, holding each other, rain hitting the window harder now, like it was trying to drown out the world outside. That night, we didn't fall into each other's arms like before. We didn't kiss or touch or even lie tangled together like we had. We sat side by side, backs against the wall, talking. Really talking. About who we were. About what it felt like to hide this part of ourselves from everyone we knew. About the fear of being seen too clearly. We talked about moments from our past we never shared with anyone. The first time he thought maybe he wasn't like the other boys, the shame that followed him after that. The way I used to lie awake at night wondering if something was wrong with me, praying it would go away. And through all of that we listened. Without judgment. Without interruption. Just listened. And something about that changed the way I looked at him. It made him feel even more real, more human. Not just the boy I was slowly falling for, but someone with shadows that matched mine. By the time we finally crawled under the covers again, there was a different kind of closeness between us. Not born from touch, but from truth. From opening wounds and letting each other see inside. I didn't need his lips on mine to feel connected. I didn't need his hands on my skin to know I mattered to him. I needed this, the honesty, the vulnerability, the rawness of being known. He reached out and took my hand as we lay there, fingers lacing with mine under the blanket. His thumb traced slow circles on the back of my hand, and in that small motion, I felt everything I needed. There were no promises spoken. No dramatic declarations. But we'd stepped across a line that couldn't be undone. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to run from it. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. We still had questions. Still had fear. But now, we also had this night. This truth. And the feeling that maybe, just maybe, we didn't have to face it all alone anymore. The days started to pass differently after that night. It wasn't that everything changed all at once. It was more like the air between us had shifted. There was a softness now in the way he looked at me, in the way he smiled when our eyes met across the room. It wasn't the intense, charged silence of before. It was something gentler, safer. Something that said we were still figuring things out, but neither of us wanted to let go. We didn't talk about labels. We didn't try to name whatever this was. It was too early for that, and both of us knew it. But we didn't ignore it either. We acknowledged it with every shared glance, every brush of hands when we walked side by side, every quiet moment when his head tilted just slightly toward mine. It felt real, even if it wasn't defined. We started spending more time together, more than we already had. But now there was a new layer to everything we did. Watching movies meant lying a little closer. Talking meant leaning in when we didn't have to. Even eating dinner felt different, like each small action was wrapped in something we hadn't touched before. I began to notice all the ways he made space for me, how he would wait for me to answer before jumping into a conversation, how he'd watch my face when I spoke like my words actually mattered. He wasn't perfect. He still got distracted, still pulled back sometimes without realizing it. But he was trying. I could see it in all the little things. And maybe that's what made it feel so overwhelming at times. The little things. Because they added up into something I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, we sat outside on the porch of his place, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the low hum of traffic a few blocks away. The sun was out for the first time in days, and the way it lit up his face made it hard to focus on anything else. He was talking about something simple, his classes, some dumb joke his friend had made over text, but I was barely hearing the words. I was too caught up in the curve of his smile, in the way he absent-mindedly twirled the spoon in his cup, in the way his knee brushed mine and didn't move. That quiet contact made my whole body tense in the most confusing way. I wanted more, and I hated that I didn't know how to ask for it without sounding desperate or unsure of what I wanted. "Can I ask you something?" I said, cutting into his story without meaning to. He paused, mid-laugh, and nodded. "Of course." I hesitated, then lowered my voice without realizing. Do you think we're hiding?" His smile faded a little, not completely, just enough to tell me he understood what I meant. He looked down at his coffee, then back at me. "Yeah. Maybe," he said. "But I don't think it's because we're ashamed. I think we're just figuring it out. Privately." I nodded, but the ache in my chest didn't go away. "I don't want to be a secret forever." The words came out softer than I meant them to, almost a whisper. He looked at me for a long time, eyes narrowing slightly like he was trying to see deeper into me. Then he set his cup down and reached for my hand. "You're not a secret," he said firmly. "You're just important. And I'm not ready for the world to take that away from me." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me understood. The world wasn't always kind to people like us. There were eyes that judged, mouths that whispered, hands that pushed away what they didn't understand. But another part of me, the part that had spent too long hiding, wanted more. I wanted to be able to reach for his hand in public. I wanted to not flinch when someone looked at us too long. I wanted to feel proud, not cautious. I wanted to be known, not by everyone, but at least by someone other than the two of us. And yet I couldn't bring myself to ask him for that. Not yet. That night I stayed over again. We lay in his bed, side by side in the dark, not speaking. Just listening to the quiet rhythm of our breathing. I turned toward him, and he turned toward me, and our foreheads touched like they had before. His hand found mine under the blanket, and he held it there, warm and steady. "Sometimes I think about what would happen if we told people," he said quietly. "What they'd say. What my parents would think. What my friends would do." I held his hand tighter, sensing the fear in his voice. "I think about it too," I whispered. "All the time." He let out a soft breath, almost like a laugh. "We're a mess, huh?" I smiled against the pillow. "Maybe. But we're our mess." We didn't talk much more after that. We didn't need to. His hand stayed in mine all night. And even though the world outside still felt uncertain, even though there were still so many questions we didn't have answers to, I slept better than I had in months. Because at least for now, in this quiet space we made for ourselves, we were enough. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something real. It didn't take long for the real world to start pressing in on the edges of what we built. At first, it was subtle. A missed call from his mom that he let ring out while I sat beside him. A group chat buzzing with messages he didn't answer while we watched a movie, his phone lighting up again and again until he finally flipped it face down. There was always something. A reason to be distracted, attention pulling at him even when he tried to act like everything was fine. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to ruin the fragile peace we had. But the longer I watched him drift further into his own head, the more I felt that distance grow between us. It wasn't anything he said. It was in the silence that stretched too long between our words. In the way his smile sometimes didn't reach his eyes. In the way his fingers twitched when they weren't holding mine. I could feel him pulling back, and it terrified me. One afternoon, We sat on the roof outside his window, a place we used to escape to when the house felt too small. The sky was cloudy, heavy like it was holding back something. I remember sitting beside him, knees drawn up to my chest, feeling the breeze pick at the edges of my sweatshirt. He was quiet. Too quiet. He hadn't said more than a few words since we got up there, and I couldn't take it anymore. "What's going on with you?" I asked, the words cutting through the silence sharper than I meant. He blinked, like I had shaken him from somewhere far away, and looked at me with a mix of guilt and weariness. "Nothing," he said, almost too quickly. "I'm fine." I shook my head. "No, you're not. You've been off all week. Just tell me the truth." He looked away, his jaw tightening, and for a long moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer at all. Then he said quietly, "I think my brother knows." My chest went tight. "Knows what?" I asked, though the answer was already burning in my throat. "About us," he said. "About me?" He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable, clearly scared. "He saw a message. One of yours. I didn't mean to leave it open, it just happened." I sat still, trying to stay calm even though my heart was racing. "What did he say?" He gave a humorless laugh. "He didn't say anything. Just looked at me. Like he was trying to figure out if he was right. And I didn't confirm it. But I didn't deny it either. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him it was okay, that we could get through it. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fear in his eyes. Maybe it was the memory of how quickly everything can fall apart when the truth starts slipping out. "Do you think he'll tell anyone?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe. He doesn't hate me or anything. But it's not like we've ever talked about this stuff before." The weight of what he was saying sat heavy between us. We both knew what it meant. If word got out, things would change. People would talk. Some might walk away. Some might push harder, ask questions we weren't ready to answer. And worst of all, we couldn't control any of it. I stared out at the horizon, the rooftops stretching into the distance, the wind brushing against my face like a whisper of warning. "I don't want to lose this," I said, my voice barely above the breeze. He turned to me then, his eyes softer. "Me either." But there was hesitation in his voice. Not because he didn't mean it, but because he didn't know how to protect it. And neither did I. That night, we didn't sleep in the same bed. Not because we didn't want to, but because his brother was home. And just the idea of him hearing something, seeing something, was enough to send a wall crashing down between us. I slept in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant creaks of the house and wondering if this was the beginning of the unraveling. The days after that were harder. He was distant, more careful. He started checking over his shoulder when we were out together. Flinching when someone called his name in public. He still smiled, still laughed sometimes, but it was thinner now, more fragile. I felt like I was losing him inch by inch, and the more I tried to hold on, the further he drifted. One night, after avoiding me most of the day, he came over without saying much and sat on the floor in my room, head in his hands. I sat beside him, not saying anything at first. Then he spoke, voice hollow. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard, trying to hold back everything that wanted to spill out. "Strong enough for what?" I asked. He looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. "For being this. For feeling this way. For letting people see." I reached out and touched his hand, slow and deliberate. "You don't have to be strong all the time," I said. "You just have to be real. With me. That's all I need." He leaned into me then, let his head rest on my shoulder, and I held him like he was slipping through my fingers. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to erase his fear, to make the world a softer place for us. But I couldn't. All I could do was stay. All I could do was be there when he broke a little under the weight of it all. That night, we didn't say much. But I think that silence was the loudest we'd ever shared. It spoke of everything we were trying to hold together. Of everything we were afraid to lose. And as I sat there holding him in the dim light, I realized that love, real love, wasn't always soft and pretty. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was messy and heavy and full of uncertainty. But it was real. And it was ours. It had been almost 2 weeks since everything began to shift, and the space between us had grown more complicated than I ever thought it could. We were still us, still the same two people who laughed over burnt toast, who spent hours lying on the floor talking about nothing and everything, who found something sacred in silence. But beneath that, beneath the moments that still felt warm and familiar, there was a new kind of tension, a quiet, careful fear that didn't have a name. It wasn't just about being seen anymore. It was about what being seen might cost us. And even though we tried not to talk about it too often, it hung in the air like smoke, curling through our conversations, tightening around our throats, that I started noticing how often he glanced over his shoulder when we were out. At the coffee shop, he sat facing the door. At the bookstore, he kept his hands in his pockets even when mine brushed his. He still smiled at me, still reached for my hand under the table when we were alone, but it always felt like he was measuring something in the silence. Like he was calculating how far he could go before the world snapped back. I didn't blame him. I never blamed him. But every time he pulled away first, something inside me ached a little deeper. It made me question things I never wanted to question. Was I pushing him too far? Was I asking for too much? Or was I just trying to hold on to something that was already slipping? One afternoon, we sat in the park, our usual spot near the old willow tree where the bench curved just enough to let us sit close without drawing too much attention. The air was thick with late spring heat, the sky a dull blue with heavy clouds lurking at the edges. He was quieter than usual, tapping his fingers against his thigh, not looking at me. I knew he had something to say, and the longer he waited, the heavier it felt. Finally, I broke the silence. "You're somewhere else today." He gave a small laugh, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Yeah," he said, staring ahead at nothing. "My mom asked me about you." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. I sat up straighter. "What did she say?" He sighed, dragging his hand through his hair. "Just asked if we were close. Asked why I've been different lately. Said she noticed I've been, I don't know, distracted." He paused, then turned to look at me for the first time in minutes. "I told her you were my friend. Just my friend." He said it so plainly, like he wanted it to sound casual, but I heard the apology buried in the way he couldn't hold my gaze. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly, unsure if I should feel hurt or just sad. "I get it," I said quietly, though part of me wanted to scream. "It's not easy." He reached for my hand then, just for a second, quick and subtle, like even in the middle of a mostly empty park, we were doing something dangerous. "I wanted to say more," he said. "I wanted to tell her everything. But I couldn't. Not yet." I looked at him, my throat tight. "When is yet?" He didn't answer right away. He leaned back on the bench, closing his eyes like he needed the weight of the question to pass over him before he could respond. "I don't know," he said finally. "I wish I did." The worst part was, I believed him. I knew he wasn't lying. I knew he wasn't ashamed of me. But still, hearing him call me just a friend made something inside me sink. And I didn't know how to ask him to see me fully when he was still learning how to see himself. That night, I walked home alone. We didn't fight, not really. But it felt like a break in the rhythm, like we'd skipped a beat and couldn't quite get back in sync. The streetlights flickered as I passed, their glow soft and almost apologetic. I kept thinking about all the little moments we shared, the first time our fingers touched in the dark, the way his voice dipped when he said my name, the way he kissed me like he was memorizing the shape of who I was. I thought about the way he looked at me when no one else was around. And I wondered how much of that he could keep hiding before it all collapsed in on itself. The following days felt slow and strange. We still talked, still met up, but something had changed. There was a hesitation in his steps, a quiet pause before every answer. I started avoiding the question of where we were going, afraid that if I asked, he'd tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. But then, one evening, everything cracked open. He showed up at my door unannounced, soaked from the rain, eyes wild and red. I pulled him inside without asking questions, grabbing a towel and wrapping it around his shoulders. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood there, breathing hard, like he'd been running not just through the rain but through something heavier, something he couldn't outrun. Then he said it, his voice shaking, but sure. "I told my brother." My heart stopped. "What happened?" He swallowed hard. "I told him about us. About me." He didn't freak out. He didn't yell. He just listened. His eyes filled with something I couldn't name, relief, fear, all tangled together. He said he already knew. Said he'd been waiting for me to say it myself. I reached for him, pulling him into a hug, holding him tightly as his arms wrapped around me, strong but trembling. "That's good," I whispered. "That's something." He nodded against my shoulder. "Yeah. But it made me realize something else." He pulled back just enough to look at me. "I can't keep doing this halfway. I don't want to. I don't want to keep hiding you. Hiding us. It's not fair to you. Or me." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My chest felt too full, like my heart was rising up into my throat. "I'm scared," he admitted. "But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of what people might say." The tears that filled my eyes weren't from pain this time. They were from the overwhelming, terrifying beauty of being seen. Really seen. And chosen. We didn't need to say more that night. We didn't need to define anything. We just needed to exist in that moment, holding each other like we finally understood the weight of everything we'd carried. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the fear didn't feel bigger than the love. The doubt didn't drown out the truth. And the space between us was no longer filled with silence. It was filled with something brave, something real. Something worth holding on to. The morning after he told his brother, everything felt different. Not loud or dramatic, not like the movies where someone comes out and suddenly fireworks go off and life rearranges itself in neat, perfect lines. No, it was subtle. Quiet. Like waking up and realizing the weight on your chest is just a blanket now, not a fear pressing you down. We lay side by side, our legs tangled under the sheets, the sunlight filtering through the curtains in long, gentle lines. He was already awake, staring at the ceiling like it held all the questions we hadn't asked yet. His hand found mine without looking, and when our fingers laced together, there was no hesitation in it. Just steady warmth. I turned to him, studied the soft expression on his face, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I saw peace there. Not a full, perfect peace, but the beginning of it. And I held on to that. The day moved slowly, wrapped in a kind of fragile calm. We didn't rush to go anywhere or do anything. He made coffee, burning the first pot like he always did, and I teased him for it, which made him roll his eyes and smile in that crooked way I had started to crave. We sat on the couch, our legs touching, scrolling on our phones in comfortable silence. But it wasn't really silence, not the kind we'd known before. This one didn't feel like it was hiding something. It felt like breathing. Like finally letting the tension unwind from our muscles, from our thoughts. He kept reaching for me in small ways, like he needed to keep confirming that I was real, that I was here. A hand on my knee. A brush of his foot against mine. And every time, I let him. I leaned in. I gave him all the answers he wasn't asking with words. Later, he asked if I wanted to go for a walk. I was surprised. He never liked walking without a reason. But I said yes, and we left the apartment, the breeze brushing against our skin like it was washing away everything we'd carried. We didn't go anywhere special. Just walked through the neighborhood, past familiar streets and old trees that had probably watched 100 other stories unfold. I kept waiting for him to pull back when we passed someone, to drop my hand if anyone looked too long. But he didn't. He held my hand the whole time, fingers firm around mine, like he was done pretending we were something less than what we were. We stopped near a small bench under an old maple tree, one we used to sit at months ago, before everything started. Back when all we had were jokes and small talk and nervous energy. He sat down and tugged me beside him, and for a while, we didn't say anything. Just listened to the rustle of the leaves above, the sound of someone mowing their lawn a few blocks away, a dog barking faintly in the distance. Then he looked at me, and there was something in his eyes, something steady and open. "I told my mom," he said, his voice calm. My breath caught. I didn't speak, just waited. He nodded slowly. "I called her this morning. Told her everything." I felt my heart speed up, part of me afraid of what would come next. "And?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He smiled, but it was a sad, complicated smile. "She cried. Not because she was angry. Just because she didn't understand. She said she needed time. But she told me she loves me." He looked down at our hands, thumb brushing over my knuckles. "And she said she wants to meet you. When I'm ready." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "That's good," I said. "That's something." He nodded. "Yeah. It is." I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder. "I'm proud of you," I whispered. He turned his face slightly, pressing his lips against my hair. "I'm just trying to be honest. With them. With you. With myself." We sat there until the sun started to dip, until the light shifted and the world felt quieter again. When we walked back, something about the way he moved felt lighter. Like telling the truth had lifted something off of him. And it made me realize just how long we'd been carrying the fear of not being accepted. Of not being enough. We had wrapped our love in secrecy not because it was shameful, but because we were terrified of what the world would do to it. But now, with each small truth, we were beginning to unwrap it. To let it breathe. To let it be seen. The following weeks weren't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, awkward questions, strange looks from people who didn't know how to place us. There were still old friends who went quiet, stopped calling, stopped answering texts. But there were also new conversations. New hands reaching out. A teacher who gave him a quiet nod in the hallway. A cousin who messaged me late at night just to say he understood, that he'd been there too. Little by little, the world didn't feel so hostile. It started to feel possible. We started making plans, not big ones, not loud ones. But we talked about visiting the coast in the summer, about going to a concert together without worrying about who might see us. We talked about painting the spare room in his place, maybe setting up a desk so I could study there when I stayed over. We talked like people who weren't afraid anymore of building a future, And every time I looked at him, really looked, I knew this wasn't just a phase. This wasn't just something we stumbled into. This was something we chose, again and again, even when it was hard. Even when it hurt. Even when we didn't have all the answers. We chose each other. To anyone watching from the outside, we probably didn't look extraordinary. Just two boys sitting on a park bench, holding hands. Just two people walking down a quiet street with tired eyes and soft smiles. But for me, it was everything. It was a love that didn't come easily, but came honestly. A love we fought for. A love we weren't afraid to show anymore. And maybe, if you're out there, feeling alone or scared or like your love doesn't have a place in this world, maybe this is the sign you need. That it does. That it matters. That you matter. Because even in the quietest corners of the world, love can find you. It can hold you. And when it does, don't let it go. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you loved, someone you lost, or someone you're still waiting for, share it. Tell your story. There's someone out there who needs to hear it, just like you needed this. And remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you are not alone. We see you. We hear you. We're right here with you.